Hello everyone, welcome to Thai Finance. Today we're going to talk about government spending and how it's not helping you, how it's affecting you directly. I was talking about the Cantillon effect in one of my last videos. And basically this theory tells us that every time the central banks inject money into the economy, that first ones to receive the newly created money see their income and purchasing power rise, whereas the last ones to receive the newly created money see their purchasing power decline as consumer price inflation comes as a product of the newly created money already in circulation. Prices will rise slowly, and this increases the wealth gap around the world because that wealth is transferred from the savers to those people that first received that newly created money. Because inflation prices comes as a product of that new fresh money. When money is created out of thin air, those new dollars take away value of existing dollars. This is a figure of the Consumer Price Index of the United States from 1775 to 2012. And I'm going to talk about the most important economic blocks right now, which is China, the European Union, and the United States. Let's see, from the Revolutionary War to War of Terror, well, prices just soared dramatically. And this is most because the creation of the Federal Reserve and the end of the gold standard. So why government spending is linked to the Consumer Price Index? First, it's because of what I explained about the Cantillon effect that you can see on my other video. So why government spending is always on the rise? Because it creates wealth out of others through the banking system. Because the first law to do so was passed on August 8th, 1911, when President William Taft signed legislation increasing the membership of the House from 391 to 433. And after that, 2 members were added when New Mexico and Arizona became states. And this is shocking because we can see that after World War II basically increased dramatically. And now there are more than 2 million people on the nation's payroll. Huge representation in the United States. And now this is not cheap. So let's see the size of China's government as percentage of the government revenue in comparison to the United States. So since China's last large fiscal reform implemented by Premier Zhu Rongji in 1993-94, which has seen the size of China's general government rise from only about 10% to now just under 25% of GDP. And at this pace of government expansion, China's general government should eclipse the size of the US general government, roughly 30% of GDP, shortly after 2020. And let's talk about Europe now, which is another economic bloc running our economy. So from the total of the 751 members of the European Parliament, the size of the chamber was reduced to 705 seats after the UK left the European Union. And of those 73 seats left vacant by the UK's exit from the Union were redistributed to better reflect the principle of diminishing proportionality. So of those 73 seats, 27 have been redistributed already to other countries, and the remaining 46 will be kept in reserve for potential future enlargement. This is crazy. We're in a deep crisis, and they're like looking forward to enlarge the government members. And this is just taking into account the parliament. There are many other institutions like the European Commission or the central bank, and they're really soaking revenues from the people because this is growing in unprecedented amounts in times of crisis. And this is the redistribution of those 27 seats. As you can see, France got 5, Spain got 5, Italy 3, and so on. Let's take a look at EU budget deficit and the debt. So the European budgetary rules prescribe a debt of up to 60% of GDP and a government deficit of up to 3%. But because of the crisis, the EU is letting go of this criteria for the time being. And this is just crazy. You will see how government spending has been so much abused. So public spending by the euro area countries as percentage of the GDP rose to 49.2% in the first quarter from 47.1% in the previous quarter. Revenue rose from 46.4% of GDP to 47%, but now this is just gone. After the pandemic crisis, just like revenues melted away. Meanwhile, the euro area countries' public debt averaged 86.3% of GDP in the first quarter, up from 84.1% at the end of last year. And this is just like over what is prescribed, that's 60%. And this is very controversial because this is just like a trend. Everything is like just all the debt is just going up like crazy, and they're not budgetary rules anymore. Debt is just seen as something normal, like if you would grab a cup of coffee in the morning. It's just so normal in these days, and this is not good. So the budget deficit in the Eurozone as a whole rose 2.2% of gross domestic product from 0.7% deficit in the fourth quarter of 2019. And the budget deficits after this will go up on the rise, just in unprecedented amounts. So this is the chart about the government debt as percentage of GDP in the European Union. So we can see that here is the 60% recommended percentage that I was talking about. And we can see that almost half of the European Union is just way above this line. And these countries are like below that line, but this is not fair for all the states, although they are a European and economic union. And all this stimulus and money printing is just to avoid uncomfortable restructuring among nation states that could potentially lead to bigger problems like war. The general government expenditure by function in the EU goes as follows. Most general government spending goes to social protection. In the future, most of these will go to unemployment supports and consumption stimulus or social welfare and everything. But I guess this is one of the main things, basically widening that inequality wealth gap. And this is because of the Cantillon effect. The more they spend on things that are not creating value and they are not well planned and executed, and it is perceived as a good thing for the people in the short term, but in the long term, it's just making lots of damage because basically we are paying for it and your children will be paying for it, and this debt will grow like crazy. So this is very, very good for politicians because in the short term, they can profit from lobbying, salaries, and corrupt businesses by getting this big budget approved by the necessity of the people. I urged you to be aware of what are the priorities of the government. Health is rising as another issue because the population is getting sick and every time gets more expensive to be healthy. And sometimes what is important, it gets squeezed out. Now we can see a chart of the environmental tax revenues by type and total environmental taxes as share of the GDP. So this is shocking because we can see that what really runs a country and what really moves the economy are the energy sectors. For example, the suppliers, transportation, aviation. And if you taxed what is moving the economy, you are drowning the efficient sector of the economy. So we can see that energy taxes are on the rise. Transportation taxes are on the rise as well. The rest is just like increasing dramatically. We can see as well in the natural gas prices for household consumers from 2008 to 2019 are on the rise as well. Here you can see that prices including taxes are just way up and they are supposed to go up as well. And with these billions of euros and dollars injected into the economy, these are just going to be rising as well because we're paying for it. This is a map that it shows how fuel taxes make a significant contribution to member state national income. Taxes are income for the government, and we can see that all the energy it's a part of the revenues from the government. And these are ways that they're basically taxing and making more pressure on people. Every time they spend more, they are pressuring you more to pay. To sell a bond, for example, an investor should look on how well they collect taxes from you, for example. This is scary. This is the electricity prices for household consumers. The electricity bill in each country, you can see how much is paid for the real electricity, how much is paid in taxes, and how much is paid in the value-added tax. So Denmark and Germany are way above in comparison to their countries. But this is scary because in the future, this pink line will go like this, will go wider. Now we can see the development of electricity prices for household consumers from 2008 to 2019. The wider the gap between these two lines, basically the more taxes you will get charged. Here you can see that these are the prices from excluding taxes and adjusted for inflation, and they're rising. They're going to the upside. Here we can see that the prices including taxes, they go as well to the upside. So it's not just taxes. The consumer price inflation is drowning our wallets. So now we can see the EU solidarity. So the 750 billion euro stimulus agreement, spearheaded by Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron in France, sent a strong signal of solidarity, even as it exposed deep new fault lines in a bloc reshaped by Britain's exit. And the deal was notable for it. First, European countries will raise large sums of money by selling bonds collectively rather than individually. So these are the Euro bonds rather than the Greek bond or the Italian bond or the German bond. At the end, nobody wants this anymore because these countries have just lots of debt and they are above the recommended percentage of 60%. This shows solidarity, but as well they show how the European Union is getting weaker and weaker from the time. And individual states can no longer be a superpower anymore as they used to be, like France or Germany, but together, it shows that together they're stronger. And much of that money will be handed out to the most affected member nations as grants that do not have to be repaid. I want to tell you, before showing you this graph, is that the government spending and the government representation in these developed countries rising is not congruent. It doesn't make sense. We have seen Belgium without president for a long time and nothing happened, really. Like, those people are well educated, they are developed countries, they can handle their own things. So they really don't need more representation, more government. I don't know in other emerging economies like Brazil, China, India, Mexico, that are much more harder to basically rule those countries where there's like huge poverty, huge population, huge wealth gap, insecurity. They're not as developed economies as Europe. So take into consideration that lots of representation, something's wrong. And here's a chart that shows us if they reduce the government size, they would get big gains just by doing that. And this is the potential GDP gains from the reducing the size of the government. And we can see that if Italy reduced the size from the government, could have a potential gain of above 30% of their GDP. Take into account this. Every time there is a crisis, the government blows a party, get just all the budget, all the money printed. And think about it this way. Every time there is a big budget approved and a big stimulus and new money printed, the government is like a filter of that money and a sponge of that money, because when there's a crisis, they have to spend it, and there are intermediaries, lobbying companies, lawyers, clients, corruption, and everything gets like filtered throughout this, and they are the big winners. And guess what? The middle class, the savers, And the people who are investing are the big losers in this game. And there's a huge wealth transfer occurring when there is a huge crisis. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope you guys subscribe to the channel, comment below, and also question all the information from me, from your government, from all the information sources, and that you can. Okay, thank you so much for listening. See you next time.